I don't know. I think it's all just really like scary for me because as tribal nations, we have all these rights that have been set, right? But then we've also have all these treaties that have been broken. So when something comes up that is for us to protect us and it's coming up to be like overturned and no longer exist, it's like, okay, what's going to happen after that? So if they overturn ICWA, what else are they going to overturn? What happens to our sovereignty? What happens to our tribal governments? And where are we going to go from there?
Yep.
So,
and then just to add on to that, they've already taken down the abortion rights. Right. So now they have control over my ovaries, if you will, my reproductive justice and freedom. And now as a Native woman, they're coming after the tribal sovereignty. And this is coming from the state of Texas. And that is concerning because there is a lot of big oil that is in the state of Texas, and big oil means profits, and profits or money, if you will, can buy you a lot. Can buy you a lot of power, can buy you a lot of politicians, can buy you judges. So it's really scary. And especially with the current political climate, if you will, it is really scary because they've already overturned Roe versus Wade. And now ICWA is up on the chopping block, so to speak.
Right.
This is why I stress so much. I used to not be involved in politics, and I had the mindset of like, this is another form of colonization, which it is. I understand that. But also, we have all these actions or like protest, and every time you go there, and you're screaming and you're yelling, that the cause, or not the cause, but like the general fight itself is going to tie to some kind of policy or some type of legislation, or it's going to come to a decision of, a board of people. And so I just always highly encourage our Native communities to get involved politically and use your right to vote. I know it sounds it sounds weird for me to say that because, again, not really wanting to buy into those processes or those concepts. But at this point in time, if we don't engage with that, this is something that could possibly happen, and it's beginning to happen, whether it's reproductive freedom, whether it is tribal sovereignty. It's happening. So I just want to highly encourage all of the Native communities to use that right to vote, to not only just come to these protests and stand up and voice your opinions, but also running for positions. So that way you have a voice at the table and you're not just at the protest. And, not to say that that's not, just as effectively making change, but also when you are able to sit in the same boardrooms or in the meetings or those conversations and be able to sit across from the same decision makers that are making these decisions, you have some say. You're sitting at their table. And so that was something that was kind of new to me. So being on the Sioux City Inclusive Committee, it was kind of frightening at first for me, or like nervous. I was nervous.
Right.
But now that I know how things go and I know how to play the game, if you will, I'm able to make those changes within that community.
Right.
So again, I just want to highly encourage all of the Native communities, tribal nations, to use that right. We do have a unique position when it comes to political engagements. So.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm super grateful for you because prior to you and I having this connection and building a relationship together, I didn't really know what political engagement was. I was not a voter, and I didn't really understand anything governmental at like a state or county level. You've definitely taught me that. You've definitely made me realize how much I matter. when it comes to like these grand numbers of everybody's opinions coming together, but also how much of an impact me being just not involved makes, right? So yeah, I'm super grateful for that because it does matter. And I'm like
so happy.
I know. And then I'm just so proud of you for being able to like occupy those spaces. Like, I don't know, when growing up or even just in like my friend groups, I don't have friends who occupy those spaces. I don't have friends that have been to the White House. Girl, you've been to the White House. Like, what? But yeah, super grateful for you in the way that you've influenced me. And that's a big word. You've definitely influenced me to be better, and you know, not to just be on social media and be like, oh, why is this happening to us? And I don't like this person and whatnot. No, it's actually, okay, why do I not like this person's opinions? Why do I not like this person's plans with their governmental influence? And what can I do to get them out of office, to get somebody else in office? And just knowing what's going on in these offices, in these beautiful buildings, and just caring about it. So yeah, you did that.
Well, thank you. But also to, you know, and this is not to negate, you know, like my thank you, but I do try to remain humble, but also like anybody can do this. I definitely come from a different background, if you will. And, you know, I've been through some things in my life, which we'll get into here shortly. But anybody can do this. Anybody that wants to make physical change, or not physical change, I should say just change in general, that you are able to do that. And, you know, don't let anybody ever make you feel that you can't do those things. You can. So, but
Absolutely.
back to the conversation of ICWA.
Right.
So I know you've had some personal experience with ICWA and like the foster home system. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went and I became a ward of the state of Texas at 48 hours old. So when I was born, my biological mother was an addict. So I was born at home. And at that time, if you were a home birth, you were automatically tested for drugs. Obviously now, regardless of where you're born at as a baby, they do blood work and they make sure everything's straight, right? Well, back then it wasn't done unless there was, you know, reasonable doubt, and they, you know, really wondered like, okay, is this child born with drugs in their system, and do we need to intervene? Well, since I was a home birth, they did that automatically. I did test positive for different drugs, and I was taken by the state, at which point my biological parents decided to sign over their rights to the state. I was in foster care for almost my first year of life, so I don't really remember it, obviously. But my foster parents were like older Caucasian people. I assume that they were great because Mary put me together baby books. So I had 2 baby books that were just photo books, and I looked really well taken care of, and it seems from the pictures that I was loved by them. But she put me together this one book, and it's called The Story of Me. So it's almost like a little scrapbook, and it's super cute. But it has like my pictures in there, but it also tells the story of how I ended up in their home. So it was really great when I had got older and I started to put the pieces together, and I had asked my gaga, my grandma, if I was adopted just out of nowhere. And so when she brought me that book, it just kind of put everything together for me in a way that at my young age, because I think I was like 9 when I started noticing like the difference in my appearance and her appearance. And but yeah, so it was great. So first year of life, pretty much in foster care. I was adopted before my first birthday because I obviously have my first birthday party pictures with my family. So the state of Texas had deemed me unadoptable because I had health issues. So for them, hold on, there's something floating, just floating in the air. So for them, because
Eagle
of my
feather.
health, right, real sacred. The spirits are with me in this moment. So with the state of Texas, they basically were like, you are going to be in foster care. You are going to be under our eyes for your entire life because you have these health issues, and we're not going to let you go. So I believe it was my grandma, my maternal grandmother. So my mom's mom had reached out to her sister and was like, hey, you know, my grandbaby's in the system. This happened. Like, I need your help. So, you know, native way, my grandma's sister is my grandma. So my grandma ended up using ICWA to fight for me. Even though the caseworkers were like, no, she has health issues. She can't be adopted. We have to keep her in our care. She was like, no, like, that's my baby. That's my granddaughter. I'm coming for her. And because of this law, you're going to let me. And so they did. They adopted me. So my grandma and my grandpa became my mom and dad. And they raised me, and I'm super grateful for that. And I'm super grateful for the way that my mom fought for me. Like, the way that she tells me, like, what happened in the story, it's just so powerful that she was able to do that. Like, she said she just showed up in Austin one day. She had called the lady, and the lady was basically, the caseworker was basically, like, brushing her to the side. And my mom was like, well, I'm already here, and I'm going to be at your door in a couple minutes. I'm coming to get her, and I'm not leaving without her. And I'm just like, okay, girl, go ahead. So,
man, let's take a moment to shout out to all the grandparents that do that. Because, like I said, there's so many layers to that. And something that I would like to talk about is also, like, coming from the parents' perspective. I know there is a lot of challenges that we face, but also our grandparents are supposed to be grandparents. They are not supposed to be necessarily child rearing. I think to be an elder, you know, you should be able to enjoy that. And I'm not saying that elders can't actively, you know, be a parent, if you will, but also, you know, we have responsibilities as mothers and fathers to our children to be there every step of the way, whether it's financially, emotionally, physically there. So, but that's, again, I'm not trying to knock necessarily anybody, because I know that it's hard. It's hard to be Native. But also, like, we have to pull ourselves up, and we have to make sure that we are there continuously for our children. Because if not, again, if you're not paying attention to what's going on in today's world, today's society, it's a threat. You know, there's things that are going on, and we need to, you know, pay attention, and we need to start making those things right again, you know.
Absolutely.
There's the balance, if you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that was, man, that just gave me shivers, like, for grandma to show up and be like, no, like, this is my baby, and I'm taking my baby back home.
Right. And then how powerful for her to just know, like, she knew that ICWA was there. You know, she knew that she could easily just be like, hey, this law is in place, and you're not going to tell me no. If you're not going to allow me to adopt her, she at least needs to be in my home. I'm an immediate family member. I'm stepping up, and this is where she needs to be. So I'm just like, again, going back to, like, political engagement, it's so important to know our rights and to know what we have to protect us, and knowing how to utilize it. Yeah.
Yep. So I want to get into kind of my personal story.
Yes.
So, and I've been like, oh man, it is, yeah. So I'm ready to share this with the world, if you will. So I was adopted right when I was born, and my auntie is the one that adopted me. And I feel like my family, my mother and my father, they wanted that to, well, I shouldn't say they wanted that, but I think they were trying to think of ICWA in a sense of like, let's do it on our own, let's do it this way. And so I had this connection, to my family, but obviously I was a baby and then just growing up. And so I was adopted by my auntie. My auntie was married at the time to a non-native, and a non-native with a lot of, money, if you will, or financial, means of supporting, just himself and the household. And so they end up divorcing. And so I ended up staying with the non-native and being in the non-native home. And therefore, I got to basically go to like private Catholic school. And that was just, at the time, it wasn't anything different to me until I started getting older and noticing like, why am I the only brown girl, if you will, in these school settings.
Right.
And I don't think it was, I don't think none of my classmates had ever made any comments or anything like that. But I also wonder, like, what were they thinking, So, and I had a really good upbringing as far as, having the financial stability, a home, over my head. But also I was lacking the cultural competency, if you will.
Yeah.
And not knowing what it meant to be ho-chunk. And then also, like, now that I am an adult woman, I am now just figuring out, the real kind of story behind of what truly happened.
Right.
And for me, it was always hard for me to fit into different places or spaces. And, I still carry a little bit of that with me today. But I love my Auntie Sarah. I love my Kaka Vi, because they were able to sit me down and give me that history of my ho-chunk side. This is who you are and this is where you come from. Shout out to Kaka Vi, because she is the one that gave me my ho-chunk name. And, it just, it makes me emotional because, there is power behind that. And, I feel like, coming back home to the home here, as in Winnebago, it meant so much to me. And, it's really funny sometimes because some people are like, gee, not that sacred, or, like poking fun at me. And obviously, like, they know I didn't grow up around here. I know that too. Thank you for telling me,
Right, yeah.
But, I do my best to try to, learn the cultural ways and learn these stories and having the resources. I think filming the Ho-Chunk Renaissance language videos has been very helpful. That was something that I wasn't necessarily like, that wasn't why I pursued to that goal of, filming with them. But it happened naturally. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that I feel like there is a lot of me. There's different versions of me that are out there that, want to reconnect, but maybe they're scared, or maybe, they don't feel like they belong. And it is scary, because to come back to the homeland, if you will, and not really grow up here, it is scary, because I know that I didn't grow up here, but also I know this is where I belong. And this is like, just coming to these realizations as an adult Native woman. I'm so thankful to my sister Jess, because she is the one that literally had came and got me when it was go time, when I was just going through a lot of things in Waterloo. She was the one that was always there for me. And she is the one that was the link to my cultural identity, to learning some of the basic teachings. And, again, I and I have social anxiety. So it is so incredibly hard for me to like say hi to people, or like, you know, like, hi, I'm Trisha, and then, you know, and yeah, it's a whole big thing. And I feel like, you know, reconnecting with my father at this point in time in my life, he shared with me that, you know, he's like, no, I wanted you. I want you to know that I wanted you.
Right.
It was never, you know, I didn't want you to feel that way, but, you know, you should know, you know, how I felt, you know, from the father's perspective. And so my dad is Pima and Meskwaki. And he shared with me that he wanted me to stay with him, but he was also suffering with alcoholism. And so he felt that he wasn't in the best, you know, stage of his life to take that on. And so, again, you know, and this is just to encourage, you know, our Native parents, again, like, you have every, you know, every way of just like, you know, I don't want people to feel like they can't get the help,
right,
if you will,
right,
because our children need it. I'm now an adult, and I'm still struggling with, you know, where do I fit in this world? You know, I'm so weird at times and so awkward, and, you know, and not really knowing where do I fit, you know?
right.
And I don't know, I guess in the sense of Ikwa, you know, he could have used that, but also he knew that he wasn't at that stage in his life where he could take that on.
Right.
So again, different layers, different dynamics, you know, and that kind of ties into also, you know, doing what's best for you and your children. So now that I'm an adult, I can determine what's best for my children.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes family dynamics are not the best, and you have the power to break those generational curses.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's my TED Talk. Thank you for coming. No, I just, I don't know, like, that was the biggest, I feel like that was healing in a way to share that. And in that way, because again, like, I am socially anxious when I'm in big crowds, and, you know, like, I think that's why I took to filming, is because I'm like hiding behind this camera, if you will, but I'm like capturing all these great moments, and, you know, seeing people, you know, in their environment, if you will, or being creative. And I think this is another way too of like, this is something that I express myself in this medium, if you will. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, I don't know, I guess just statistically, when it comes to children who have been adopted, is it common for us to have like social anxiety? So, because I'm very outgoing. I'm a very outgoing person naturally, but on the inside, I'm like cringing, right? And then when you take it to like our cultural level, right? When you're around people and you introduce yourself, generally the first question they'll ask you is, who are your people? And I'm like, okay, well, so I have two sets of people, like, which one do you want? Because you're going to recognize me, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember you. Last time I seen you were just this big running around the powwow grounds. You're going to remember me if I give you it's so weird for me to say like grandma, grandpa's names, because they've always been mom and dad. So if I give you my mom and dad's names, you're going to recognize me from that. But if I give you my biological mom's name, because she's a Winnebago woman too, you're probably just going to look at me like, oh, okay, because nobody knows her up here. She didn't grow up here. She's a Texas woman. She grew up in Texas. That's where she's from. So it's always, I don't know, it's like an awkward thing for me, right? So I always introduce myself with my mom and dad, because this is where people recognize me from. But that also ties back into like what you were saying as far as like, where do I fit in? I have these different identities. When I was 18, my mom sent me to my biological mom in Texas because I was making really poor choices. And she was like, you need this experience because this is the path that you're heading down. You're making the same choices that your biological mom made. And, you know, when she would get upset with me, she would always be like, you're just like your mom, you know, which has like its own trauma in it. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I've had to learn how to be like, okay, and give my mom grace for, because was she trying to hurt my feelings? No, she was more or less, I almost want to say, instilling like a sense of fear in me, because no one wants to be an addict. No one wants to be an absent mom.
Yep.
No one wants to be in and out of the prison system. Right? So it's supposed to instill this fear, but it kind of just, it made me feel a hurt, right? Because then I would be like, well, maybe I want to be like her because I don't know her. So, you know, maybe she's actually a really great person and you just don't view her as being, you know, because I was young and I'd be like, oh, you don't like her because you just don't. No, girl, this was this woman's auntie. Like, she knew her and she loved her. But she also understood that she loved me and it was her job to keep me from going down that same path. I wasn't taken out of that home and put into these different experiences to make those same mistakes. So at 18, I had met her. I didn't plan on meeting her. So I actually went to my oldest sister, and that's who was supposed to help me get my stuff together and get back on the right path. But it's funny, and we laugh about it now. It wasn't funny in the moment. I was like, I need to go back to Iowa. This is not it. But my sister picked me up from the airport, and she was like, so do you want to go meet Mom? And I was like, no. Because at that point, I had only spoke to her once in my life, and it was on my 11th birthday, and it just didn't go good. It was not a good experience. So I was like, no, I don't want to meet her. Like, why would I want to meet her? I don't know her. And I have all this resentment towards her, right? Well, my sister was like, yeah, you're going to meet her. And just kind of like pulled up at her house. And it was crazy because as soon as I seen her, like all that resentment just kind of left my body. And I was like overcome with emotions, but I was like really happy to meet her. But it was like weird because I looked like her and I had never made that connection in my life, right? Like, throughout my childhood, I always looked different. I was light complected. My family is not light complected. They're dark complected. I had like sandy blonde hair growing up. Have you seen that meme where it's like the sandy blonde kids that are like mixed race are like the worst? And I was like, yeah, that was me. But so like to meet her and to feel like this sense of like a new identity, I was like, oh, wow. I like fit in here. I look like my sister. I look like my biological mom. My oldest brother was there. I was like, I look like him, except he's like 6'7". He's enormous. I'm tall, but I'm not that tall. But to get like that part of my identity back was really cool. Of course, I ended up going through traumas because my mom lives a traumatic lifestyle, and unfortunately, as much as she loves us, she's going to cause her kids hurt because in our egos, we have these expectations for her as a mother. And because she has this illness of addiction, she's not able to meet those expectations. And so that's something that we all, because I'm 5 of 6. I'm the youngest girl and I have one little brother. All of us go through our different stages where we're able to embrace her and who she is, and we're able to handle it. And then we have our stages where we just can't handle it. It's too hurtful. I've reconnected with her in like the past week because my oldest sister reconnected with her, and she tells me all these stories of, you know, she's clean right now, she's sober right now, and her mental health is doing a lot better, and she's making smart choices to take care of herself. So, you know, I've reconnected, but there's always that fear in the background of, okay, well, how long is this going to last this time? How long is this going to be healthy for? And am I going to be able to handle it if it becomes an unhealthy situation again? Am I going to be able to make it through that? So being adopted is traumatic in itself. You know, I definitely feel for the people that are adopted. Even if you had a really good childhood growing up, there's this piece of you that's missing. And psychologically, that has its effects, no matter how good your parents who raised you do with raising you. They could be the most loving family ever, but you're still going to have these psychological damages of like, why wasn't I good enough? Or why didn't they want me? Why didn't they get their stuff together so that they could keep me? You know, and I'll be 31 this year, and I'm about to cry right now. Those psychological damages don't just go away. I've been in therapy since I was like 2 years old, on and off, but they still live there. And it's unfortunate. So I think going back to like resources are so important to help yourself. Help yourself. If you're going to have kids, even if you're not struggling with addiction, even if you're doing everything right to a societal standard, there's still resources out there. You could have the picture perfect life, but therapy might still be for you. Being a parent is not easy. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of patience, and you have to give so much of yourself away to love your children and provide them with the life that they need. And unfortunately, do your kids pour back into you? Yeah, but they can't pour back into you at the level that you're pouring into them. So you need those outlets that pour back into you. And yeah, adoption is such a messy thing, but I'm super grateful. I'm super grateful for my parents, because kind of like you were saying, like you're reconnecting to your culture and you're learning through it with these opportunities that you have. I've never had to reconnect because I was connected. I lived in Winnebago as a young girl. I went to preschool here, and then we moved up to Sioux City, and that's where I lived up until I was 18. But when I would take a sick day because I didn't want to go to school, because I was perfectly fine, and my mom would know. She'd be like, this girl is fine. So when I would take a sick day, my mom would legitimately drive us down here, and we would go to the Senior Citizen Center for lunch. And I would have to sit down, shut up, and listen to my elders. Those were the expectations. You don't want to go to school? That's okay, but you're going to learn something today. You're going to learn from your elders. And I'm forever grateful for those sick days that I was not sick, and I thought I was just going to stay at home and hang out. And then when my friends got home from school, I was going to go out and play. No, I came down here and I learned. And my mom was always very, she was heavily included in like the services when our relatives would pass over to spirit side. And so I make jokes sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, I've been to way more funerals than I have baby showers. And legitimately, I've only been to 2 baby showers in my life. But for my whole childhood, I'm pretty sure I went to every funeral that was held in Winnebago. And I was always at the hospitals when it was time to pray with the relatives and let them know, you know, everybody's here. You don't have to hold on anymore. But there's a beauty in that that's non-replaceable. You know, growing up, I had this longing for my biological family. But as an adult, I'm like, I can't even imagine what it would be like for me to not have my cultural roots. Like the experiences that I had growing up as a Native girl literally shaped who I am today. You know, not to say that being adopted didn't. Yeah, that was the first step. By them adopting me is what brought me here and kept me here. So I'm all for it, Ikwa.
Yes.
I am.
Yes. I just want to add on to that conversation as far as, you know, as being an adopted Native American woman, if you will. Yes. I do have kids. And so again, bringing back the family dynamics of breaking those generational curses, I have to now think about my kids and now knowing how I felt, you know, growing up and not necessarily growing up on the res or like being around my people, if you will. I have the responsibility now to my children to make sure that they are coming into those spaces and that they are connected. And another thing too is I also want to kind of encourage, you know, folks like myself, like as in adoptees, to learn the language, to learn the cultural ways, to reconnect, and don't be afraid, like fully immerse yourself into that. Because I think I was just so nervous and like, you know, like nobody knows. And again, it ties back to the social anxiety where I'm like, oh, I'm so awkward. And, you know, and that may have stemmed too from like just growing up in the spaces that I was growing up in, and just kind of being the brown girl, if you will, at these schools and, you know, sporting events and, you know, just everywhere, honestly.
Right. Just feeling different.
Yeah. Cause I mean, definitely like pulling up to a piano recital in Cedar Falls, Iowa with my white dad, you know, like, and here I am, like, you know, it's definitely, I do think about those. And again, like, I don't necessarily, you know, want to say anything negative about my childhood, because I did have a good childhood and I was taken care of, but also that cultural part of that, of me was missing. And I think, I lost my train of thought there, but what I was basically trying to say was, you know, if you are adopted, you know, don't let that hinder your process of coming back into your community, basically. So I want to switch gears here. I want to talk about you know, we have these different layers, and you know, from the tribal standpoint of, you know, having the child caseworkers, or even on a state level too, because the tribal nations are a political entity of themselves, and so this is a federal law. And so the federal government, or the U.S. Supreme Court, basically affirmed the constitutionality of ICWA and basically said that, you know, this is, you know, from the sounds of it, I should say, because it's a still pending case. Right. But also there is the state side of things. So even if the federal government were to say, you know, this is constitutionally okay, and we're going to keep this law, we also have the state, you know, side of things. So it's always scary to think of it, you know, we have these checks and balances, if you will. So, but in regards to that, I think that having tribally or training, if you will, for our professionals here with child family services, or, you know, anybody that is in that realm, to really be there with a good heart, with a good intention and good mindset, and being there to really advocate and stand up for our Native children is going to be such a great asset to any tribal nation. And so, yeah, I don't know, like, do you have anything that you want to talk about as far as like the tribal perspective of like ICWA?
I guess there's really not a lot that I can say, because I don't understand it from that level. I never had a caseworker here. I only had a caseworker in Texas that was non-native, and I've never really been included. But I do know one thing that like makes me happy is when I go into like different buildings here. Like you have the bulletin board, right? And on the bulletin board, there's like a flyer where they're looking for families here to foster children from here, from Macy, from surrounding reservations. Because at the end of the day, you can't put our children into a Native household if there's no Native household to put them into. So that always makes me happy, because whether the caseworkers or organizations that are putting these flyers together are Native or non-Native, there's an effort. There's an effort that's being put forth to keep our kids within their cultural roots, within a within a home that can teach them their ways. And, you know, even if it's just for a short period of time, well, the parent goes through classes and counseling and is being taught, you know, how to be a better parent, how to have a better environment for their child. It's allowing that child's, I guess, cultural experience to not be interrupted, to avoid those children having those missing pieces, right? Or those different identities of where do I fit in? It's like, okay, I'm still here, or I'm still in a family that, you know, has the artwork on the walls that I'm used to, that has the accent that I'm used to, that does things, that puts out a spirit plate. You know, like those little things mean the world, especially when you're a young child and that's what you come from. To go into a different experience where they don't do that, or they do something different, then it's like, okay, this is weird. Is this okay? You know, and then it almost instills like a feeling of guilt inside the child, but the child should not be feeling guilty for anything that's going through that experience of being separated from their parents.
Yes. So in a historical context too, ICWA was made because we had, you know, just the dawn of colonization, if you will. We had, you know, our children ripped from their homes, from their families, and, you know, it hasn't necessarily, there have been, you know, with ICWA, we have been able to say, no, we're not allowing that anymore. But I think that it still trickles down, you know, because I mean, there's obviously the intergenerational trauma from that, you know, especially from the Indian boarding school era. Right. You know, we still had obviously our children being taken away from us and having this kill the Indian, save the man mindset. Right. And that is so dangerous. And that's why I think today we have to pay attention to what's going on, because that could be a reality. They're not saying it out loud, right? Because people are calling them out. But at the same time, if you're not engaging, if you're not showing up, if you're not, you know, it could happen again. It could happen. And I don't mean to like scare everybody, but you know, this is a reality because we are not engaging and infiltrating the political systems like we should. And we definitely should. Right. So, absolutely. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we switch gears?
There was like a quote that I wanted to share because I really liked it. So it comes from Sarah Deer, who is a professor at the University of Kansas. She's also the Chief of Justice for the Prairie Island Indian community. And what she had said in reference to ICWA is that most opposition to the ICWA focuses largely on the flat assumption that Native people are strictly a racial category rather than citizens of independent sovereign governments. And when I read that, it just, I don't know, it kind of shook my spirit a little bit, right? Because we're not a race. Yes. We are a community. We're a community that lives within this nation, right? Because we have to. Because that's how we were placed. That's just how history unfolded, that we are not just American citizens. We are citizens of our own community. So I really loved that. I really loved the way she said that. So
yeah, so there is a comment on the live stream, and it says, our Winnebago Tribal of Nebraska tribal courts have our familial connections built into our law, but the issue is for folks who live off the reservation, which majority do. And that is interesting because, again, it comes down to the jurisdictions of, you know, the federal, then you have the tribal, then you have the state. And so if you are living off of the reservation and living in an urban area, it is hard to navigate through that, especially when it comes, you know, just, it doesn't even have to be ICWA. It has, you know, this is like reproductive justice. This is, you know, voting rights. I know that the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska is also, you know, just filed a lawsuit on voter suppression, I believe. And so, yeah, Thank you for sharing that, because I do. Absolutely. We still are. It's not a racial. We are not a racial group, if you will. We are sovereign nations. We have our own way of government and doings, and sometimes those create, some people bump heads on those specific issues, which is fine. That's we can do that because we're tribal nations. We can do that. Yeah. And so I'm just really hoping that people get plugged in, and I think if you wake up and you see what's going on, this should concern you. You know. So, is there anything else that you would like to? Any closing remarks?
Well, I guess addressing the comment as well. So, that's my experience. Mm-hmm. I came from Texas. My mother did not live on the Winnebago Reservation. She lived in Austin, Texas. But again, that's why it's important to know our rights and to know what type of laws are behind us to help us in the process. Because had my grandmother not known about ICWA, I probably would have aged out of the system, versus being brought home and being raised in her home with her. My family could have been like, oh, well, her parents already gave up their rights. There's not anything we can do about it. No, there's still stuff that you can do. And it's just important to know what it is, because you can have these caseworkers that are not the nicest people and are not trying to help. You can have judges who don't really care to hear your concerns. But if you can sit there and you can be like, okay, but this law is in place, that is taking your power back. You're saying, no, you're not going to tell me no, because this is here and this is what it's for. It's to help this child, my niece, my nephew, my little cousin, my grandchild. It's to help that child, and I want them. And to stand up and say I want them means everything to us kids who feel unwanted. To have someone to fight for us and say, I'm not going to let you get lost in the system, I'm going to bring you home, is so important. So again, political engagement, knowing your rights, it's super important.
Period.
Yes.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. We are also on TuneIn, a free internet radio. Last but not least, you can watch our podcast under Great Plains Action Society on YouTube. And next week, we'll be focusing on Black History Month. I don't know if you have anything else to say, or if you want to kind of talk about maybe what we have in store for next week for Black History Month, or
So I know next week we'll definitely talk about the stigmas with being Afro-Indigenous, and also the correlation between Black history and Native American history. I think also we'll be touching base on what are they doing in the school systems right now, where they're not trying to talk about the history anymore because it could be offensive. Are we what is that called?
The critical race theory.
Critical race theory. Radical. I just threw whatever word out I could. But so it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm super excited about it, and I can't wait to dive into it.
Thank you for watching.